Welcome to Replenish Earth Live. I'm Tia Kansara. Today we have Adah Parris, futurist, artist, activist, to share her project with Buckminster Fuller program called the Ecological Triptych, a mesh between colonialism, capitalism, and climate change. I think it's going to be a really fascinating discussion. So please do join us. We'll explore through the lens of cyborg shamanism, how the ego links through them all. So without further ado, let me invite you. Adah, welcome to the show.
Good morning. How are you?
Good morning.
You well?
Oh, my darling. Yes, really, really well, actually. Just having this moment where so many things have been coming together. I've been having a number of discussions across, let's say, multiple live sessions, and it's almost as if they sort of like really like patch in. Like there are different parts of conversations that are sort of merging, and I'm not without even trying. I'm seeing all of these connections. So it's really interesting.
But that's also, it says a lot about you and the way that you have conversations with people, and you actually quite naturally connect the dots anyhow. So it doesn't surprise me in the least.
It's kind of like there's
it's kind of like you're a systems thinker.
One could. What? Yeah, I mean, I've been fascinated with like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and then sort of like integral and spiral theory, and like sort of like Ken Wilber and Buckminster Fuller, of course. And then there is this sort of like combination point where it's sort of like a friend of mine, Charles, calls it cross-modalism, right? Like this modal, multimodal sort of like systems that come together where the senses go beyond the physical senses. And we've been so ingrained with these, like, we have 5 senses. It's like one must have 8 glasses of water, and then, you know, the rest of it is like unnecessary, like recommended daily allowance of like 1,000, you know, international units of vitamin D, and the rest of it is not necessary.
Allowed, right? That's all we're allowed. We've got to fit into a box, and we're only allowed to have as much as people say that we can, but actually forgetting that we are human and we are multisensory, and the world exists in this multisensory format. So when we tell stories, when we tell or receive stories, it's not just with our eyes or our ears, it's with all of us. And I think that is I think that, and we've talked about this before, I think that this current pandemic has enabled more people to recognize that we are very multisensory and be open to new ideas and different ways of thinking, because the old normal doesn't exist anymore. And the things that many people thought were true or guiding, or they built their sense of identity on, has gone. We used to be so focused on being recreating the past,
but almost like acceptable, right? It's like we want to be accepted, so much so that it doesn't really matter. Like, I don't really want to listen to myself because I've got to listen to everybody else to fulfill whatever categorization I've been put into, and most of the time it's sort of somebody else's categorization. And I've recently if I may, exactly. Like, you know, it's almost as if this sort of branding exercise of categorizing a niche means that you've been put into this box. You must behave like this. And it's really interesting because we're going through a sort of like branding exercise with Replenish Earth at the moment. And one of the questions is sort of like, what are the profiles of the people that are replenishers? And it's interesting because, you know, one thing is to sort of identify people who are already doing it, and the other is to identify a category of almost like a role that doesn't really exist at the moment, but we're creating it. And it's fascinating. It's like creating a role and feeding it.
But isn't that categorization that you're talking about? That's exactly what I'm talking about with colonization. We divide. We divide, label, and we assign a value to it, and then we expect everybody else to live within that value system and structure that we have created. It's a very Western perspective of life.
It is.
There is this. I mean, if you think about most of the Western systems that we have, money, education, you know, all of those things, the idea of claiming ownership over labels, job descriptions, job titles, they're all created to create this hierarchy. And whilst I understand and accept that we need some form of being able to communicate, I think that sometimes we put so much emphasis on these structures that it stops us from actually seeing where the true value is. I'm going to stop there.
Okay. I kind of, you know for now you're not going to stop there, Adah. But you know, this is just the beginning.
And I know what our conversations are like, so I went reel myself in for a bit. I'm still here for some questions for me.
I love it because you know where we met over a Christmas party. Like I was trying to remember when we met. We met 2017 before I was going to go on the QE2 on a cruise with my mate Lizzie, who was putting us all together for a dinner party. I remember this because we danced like crazy. And I think what like and a quick shout out to Jimmy as well, who runs Unbox London. And one of the things that I love about unboxing, right, is this sort of unboxing through the lenses of human interaction. And of course there is this sort of identification with Western and Eastern, but there are Eastern people in Western spaces now, right? Like so what does it mean when we start to like connect these places and spaces, almost like the yin yang kind of like, sorry, I'm like, the kind of like one is within the other, right? Like one is now within the other. So we're now where maybe colonialism would have been at almost its purest sense. We're now at that stage where it's kind of coming through an evolution, a step change, like less about the hierarchical structures of military so we can divide and conquer, and more about, you know, more fluid structures and more flowing structures. So what are your thoughts on that?
But I think it shows up in different ways, because if we get back to, I think it's around the 1500s, the idea of colonization and colonialism kind of really came to the forefront, or really started to emerge. And there was a particular idea of how that manifested itself in terms of colonizing lands and peoples and all of this lot. But now, if I think with my tech futurist hat on, you know, if we think about access to data and privacy and access to technologies and all of these different things, I think that is very interesting. What my observation is that it's still very much based on hierarchy and labeling things and assigning value to things, which is very different than many of the many indigenous peoples and other ways of thinking and understanding. And you're right, there seems to be more. I think there's more people now who are aware of the different sides and starting to merge those things. I think it's probably always happened, but those people would have been underground, seen as anarchists or rebels or what have you, you know, cyberpunks, all of that. And I think that we've got to a time now where more and more people are recognizing and wanting to do that. But I think my concern is that it's done with respect and with acknowledgement to where those customs and where those belief systems come from, rather than just, again, recognizing that there is value in an indigenous practice and taking that and rebranding it as something from Silicon Valley, without recognizing that this is heritage and ancestry, and this is a way of life. I'm just concerned about the speed that some of this thing seems to be happening. And I hope that people start to take their time to really think and recognize and give credit where credit is due. And that's not just a nod to say this is where it came from, but actually recognizing how do you bring these different practices, and I'm very mindful of sacred practices, but different practices in that we can try and start to work together and heal the earth and do all these different things, but we have to acknowledge where they came from.
Kind of reminds me so much of the craze with yoga. People would go absolutely bonkers with this yoga and that yoga, and it was like, you're going to be a yogi and you're going to go to Rishikesh. Rishikesh has now subsequently become probably one of the most popular places in India to go and visit, apart from Goa moon parties. But but Rishikesh became that sort of the place that one could identify with yoga training. And then literally the other day with a friend of mine, Andy and Ben, we were talking about Muji and Osho and all of these other sort of leaders, their practices, Yogi Bhajan, their practices, and how their practices had sort of like evolved, and how there is almost inside of us, this is sort of going a little bit off piece, but how there is this desire for divine, right? Like the guruization of things, people, places, the idolization of something. And I come from a culture that has idols, right? Like we sort of like almost concentrate on that.
Leads really nicely into the idea of cyborg shamanism, because the way that I had started to look at that. So I was working as a technologist, tech futurist. I was also an activist, and that's not necessarily about going out to protest marches, but more around seeing things, believing in things, something bigger than myself, and wanting to change the world or people in some way, and amplifying their stories. But looking at the way that we use technology, and that could be a whole different conversation about what is tech. But looking at the way that we use tech, I realized that there was this almost religious-like way that people were starting to use it. There's a separation between it and us. Artificial intelligence will gain consciousness. Well, we don't even know what that is. So I find that baffling, or that the robots will take over, or all the machines. And there was this separation and almost this worship of what tech is. But recognizing also that we have been using digital technologies to connect with ourselves, to understand our relationship with ourselves, to understand our relationship with our environment, and to understand our relationship with others. And I was having a conversation with a friend, and I'm on the board of their company, Livu Babbitts from the North Sense, who is a cyborg, and he has an implant in his chest that effectively turns him into the way I described it once is like a human compass, because he can detect magnetic north. And having this conversation with him, I realized that what he was doing, using the hardware to do, was the same thing that people who go down the shamanic route do. They use plant medicine to gain some sense of enlightenment, to connect with themselves and understand the relationship with themselves, to understand their relationship with their environment, and to understand their relationship with others. And we're recognizing that what I thought initially were these two polar opposite worlds, find technology. So those tools, whether it's a hardware piece of tech that you stick inside of you or plant medicine, I then saw both of those as technology. And the fact that if we are all trying to do the same thing to gain some sense of enlightenment, to fill whatever gap that is there, that maybe I could bring the cyborgs and the shaman together to solve problems. Because to me, then there's no hierarchy between the two. And that's how cyborg shamanism was born. And then it became,
That's
over the
incredible.
years, it became this inquiry into where else am I seeing those patterns? And so I sort of recognized the patterns. And this is through conversations with people who are more versed in these worlds than I am, around quantum physics and quantum mechanics, the pattern is there. Spirituality and belief systems, the pattern is there. And so it went from being what I thought was linear, which, of course, I thought that the relationship was linear, and realized that actually it's not, because of all these different worlds. And so cyborg shamanism is it's a language to help us recognize the patterns between all these worlds, to actually recognize our relationship with technology, and that we were creating this separation between it and us.
I have so much excitement going on inside me right now. I mean, the first the
and I know
the first thing that
you're doing a happy dance.
the jiggle. I'm doing the jiggle. I kind of like, so the first thing that came up was that, the tools of augmentation, like glasses, technology, anything that augments is sort of part of that technological sort of capability. Something that we sort of experience is teaching an augmentation. And I'm curious about that because we've almost got like these sort of like, okay, so the most extreme thing to do, like given this is really fascinating me right now, as you can tell. On the one side, you've got the sort of like, sorry. On the one side, you've got this sort of like, what do you do when it's all gone bad? You know, like triage system at like a hospital, because you've literally taken everything to an absolute extreme, right? Like you've, you know, every like, and it could be, I'm sorry, like I didn't mean extreme as in like it's all your fault, but like something where maybe the telltale signs were there all along, it's just that you didn't see them, or you weren't like in touch with your body, or you weren't in touch with the signs, you weren't in touch with medicine and what medicine can do, and or preventative medicine. Perhaps you didn't have the teachers that were around. So it's like, wow, okay, cool. On the one side, you've got these tools of augmentation, but ultimately they become even more further apart almost from nature. Like you've got this sort of like the internal senses, the inner tuition, the kind of the guidance, the telepathy, the you know, some call it the spiritual senses.
But I think they're the same in many ways. I think that they are. The intentionality is the same. I think that's where I saw the connection. That the intentionality is the same. It's this desire to connect or to understand or to what have you, to enhance us in some way, some capacity. It's just that we as humans have developed more mechanical technologies, and so that's why it's moved away from nature. I mean, I sit in all of those worlds, and so whilst I am a big tech junkie, I still understand and recognize the value and the beauty of nature. And that's where I try to make sure that whatever I'm doing, even if I am talking about virtual reality, there's still that element of where do we find this in nature? How do we, because sometimes I think that we start to create, somebody posted it up on Facebook once that, and it was a meme that somebody had built a digital tree to pump oxygen, nutrients back into the atmosphere. And then they had a sign just saying this tree is out of service. And you're going, but that's what normal trees do. Why do you need a digital tree, a technological tree, to do what nature is already there for? Or what nature is, well, not there for, but what nature can already give us. And I think that that's where this gets really interesting, because it becomes a conversation that we've had before around the ethics and responsibility of doing this. Do we move further away from nature in order to make things more convenient for ourselves? Or do we go back to nature to actually just ground ourselves? You know, and I'm not saying it should be either or, but those are lots of the questions that we've been having.
So, so just a little bit on the show, who's clairvoyant, did an actual amazing grounding meditation. So definitely that's something that people can do. But that, you know, as you were talking about this sort of like connection point between, you know, what are the opportunities that we have today to be able to cultivate this inside of us, right? Like we are nature, right? There's really no, as Merlin Sheldrake was saying the other day, we are so connected, so intertwined with nature that the separation doesn't really exist. It's all in almost like our mind is the one that separates, right? Like this, as the Hindus would call Maya, is the one that materializes. So it's that illusion of separation that we are separate from that which exists. So it's almost as if, depending on one's level of separation, one would either use nature, or one would use other forms of technologies and various other things to still try and connect, to still try and like to be able to survive, to be able to connect with. And it's really fascinating me that, you know, pretty much the same thing. I mean, you know, whether you're using a tree inside your building in the atria to create more incredible amounts of oxygen, or, you know, breathable, livable spaces indoors, like Rachel Armstrong's work on living architecture, or whether you're trying, you know, to sort of like bring in the technology, the air conditioned, hermetically sealed building, so that you can get some sort of like controlled system.
I mean, I think there's place for all of them. I think at the end of the day, it all comes down to choice, doesn't it? That we can choose where we go. I just, on a personal level, I suppose that I will always have both in my life, and I know that people will be in various places of that. on various people will make decisions that are based on their own needs and desires and what they're trying to achieve. And I'm not saying that one is right and one is wrong. They're just different. They're just different. And I think that there is place. I believe that there is place for both. And you mentioned Rachel Armstrong's work. Yeah, great work.
Yeah, like this sort of almost like, imagine if we've learned what we've tried to do is almost get back to like the Vedas already talk about flying objects and rockets, and science that doesn't even exist today is already in these these beautiful books that were written by Ved Vyas. And there is this element of
that does exist. It probably exists in nature. It may be a dragonfly, that flying object that they're talking about, and we've just taken that and turned that into a helicopter.
So yeah, it's very sort of like mathematical, and they've got like actual beautiful imagery around actual flying objects, but yes, to the natural sort of element of it as well. It's as if we're able to do these very specific things. Like if you look at Rupert Sheldrake's website, something that he launched recently was telepathic work, as in practice your telepathy. And so I think it's only available in the US, the UK, and one other country. Rupert told me about it recently, but it's literally just 3 people getting on the telephone. We should totally try this. 3 people getting on the telephone and having a conversation and learning about telepathy.
Okay. Oh, you've just muted yourself. Yeah, we should. I will definitely have a look at the website, and then we should just try.
It's sort of like this. We have these skills of innate ability, right? Like I remember the 4th day of my Vipassana that I did in Hawaii with Jorge and a very dear human called David Weber, and they launched this sort of Vipassana, which is a combination of Vipassana, breath work, yin yoga. And on the 4th day, I was tripping balls. And it was almost like being...
You were getting high in your own supply, right?
I was getting high on my own. But I've never done that before. So it's not as if I'd ever experienced that before.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow, wait, no ayahuasca needed. It was that. That's what it was. I was like, wow.
I discovered a meditation that does that to me. So you just kind of focus on here, on the inside, the gland there, and you just close your eyes and just imagine it starting to vibrate. And then just imagine it starting to get faster and faster. And I was with a group of people doing this meditation, and then they looked at me and they just went, "You're high." This is me, yeah.
Did you just notice?
But that's the point, that there are so many things that. So we're going back to Livu for a moment with the cyborg nest and the implant. Part of that discussion with him was around the fact that he and the team had developed this technology because they realized that part of it was that they recognized that we as humans had lost our ability to be connected to the Earth's magnetic poles and to navigate ourselves around. Now, so there are, birds do this. There is and I'm sure there are more, but I only know one so far, Aborigine tribe, who can do that quite naturally. And it changes your relationship with your environment, not just, the city or the town that you're in, but actually being able to connect on a magnetic level with the earth is powerful. I mean, even just thinking about it makes my stomach go. It feels beautiful. And I feel that, especially in the West, have distracted ourselves with so much stuff that technology is supposed to give us more free time or something, but we still decide to cram things into that space and not actually go. And I think that that's what the pandemic and the lockdown has done. As devastating as it has been, it's given us all that space to exhale and really just go, the shoulders have dropped and we've all just gone, okay. And once we've got past that, shit, what is happening? I think that many of us around the world started to ask ourselves those existential questions of, who am I? what's important to me, what impact do I want to have in the world? Where do I want to live? All of those things. And I think that that's why I'm really pleased. Once we got over the everybody's doing everything on Zoom, and you just Zoom burnout. Now it feels like these real, and maybe it may be that I'm in my own, echo chamber, but it feels like these really beautiful, deep conversations about the connection with life and nature and animism and all of this are starting to happen, and they're happening in spaces that we probably would not have necessarily seen those before. For me to be able to talk about cyborg shamanism and ancient indigenous wisdom and natural systems at a tech innovation conference is amazing. I'm not necessarily preaching to the converted anymore. And so having these conversations like with you, I find is just beautiful. I think that people are more open to finding something different and to exploring and not being afraid to do that. And like you said, the recognizing that we have to have the yin and the yang, the good and the bad, the light and dark, as part of this whole process to move forward. And I think that what I hope will start to happen is people who are having these conversations are starting to converge and starting to share ideas and breaking down those borders and boundaries. Again, that idea of colonialism, breaking down those rankings and borders and boundaries and coming together. And that, to me, is about ego. The ego is diminishing, and being able to come together and say, right, we're all working towards the same thing. We all have different ways of doing it, different approaches, different understanding, different levels of experience and wisdom and knowledge, and let us come together to try and address that and look at that, because that is then how we can start to look at climate, looking at and moving on to the ecological triptych. That's where it kind of started, was looking at what was going on during the lockdown, taking that breath and just looking and saying, well, I can see some patterns. There's one, people are suddenly recognizing each other as human again. And, recognizing that we need to try and help each other meet our most basic needs, or Maslow's hierarchy of needs. What's the most basic thing that people need? Survival, roof, food, all of those things. It didn't matter what background, ethnicity, age, gender, whatever you were. People started to recognize that. So the borders and boundaries, that colonization bit started to dissolve. The environment, there was a marked difference in the environment because people stopped traveling and we stopped, doing all the stuff and traveling around. And there's, more recently is seeing that actually going online and all of us using Zoom and Netflix and the energy consumption is adding to things. But generally looking at it at the beginning, there was a change in the climate. And that was because part of that, what could be down to, we stopped traveling so much, we stopped consuming so much, we stopped spending so much. And so that is the capitalism link. And so I saw that these three things are all interconnected: colonialism, capitalism, and climate change. And the thing that seemed to connect them was the ego. And I remembered Freud's the id, the ego, the super ego. And so colonialism is the id. That, in the West, it was the id. It's the id. I see it as the id. It's that desire, that inherent kind of natural desire to colonize and divide and conquer and separate and label. Climate change is the super ego. It's that we know that we could be doing more, we should be doing more, but it's that internal conflict, that moral conscience fighting. We say that we are trying to do the best for climate change and we'll become vegan, or we'll stop, buying slow, fast fashion, but then still fly to Bali to go and do a yoga retreat. And so it's that conflict between the what's good for the planet versus what's good for me. And the fact that we all stopped traveling during the pandemic and moving around because the fear of death was greater than the desire to travel to Peru to go and do ayahuasca, or to Bali to go and do yoga. And then we stopped spending. So capitalism is the bit that sits in between those two. Capitalism, the money thing, is what sits in between those two worlds of colonialism, this desire to rank, and climate change, this desire to do good in the world, but actually I have enough money to be able to fly to Bali or to Peru or to wherever. That's how I saw it. And that's what my new inquiry is about through the studio.
I think that's really beautiful. Thank you so much for, you know, putting it and placing it, you know, as the sort of almost the ecosystem map that you've been following, you've been questioning, because in this is sort of like the power in the first person, the subjective experience of people sitting at home and being cocooned, in the chrysalis, having that, as we call it, the in the imaginal cells of humanity, transitioning from, you know, the kind of almost like the gluttonous caterpillar, right? Like beefing ourselves up to the point where once we enter, we've no idea where we're going. You know, we don't know what the struggle of the caterpillar turning into the goop that turns into the struggle for the actual, you know, butterfly to emerge. But there is this piece of the first subjective experience that people have had with systems breaking down, with, you know, the environment being, you know, visible. Most people couldn't really see the skies properly, and or without that smog, or couldn't see the mountains from their window, or couldn't, you know, there's this almost like, wait, it could be this good. Like I remember in a conversation I had with somebody in India, they told me that I just wasn't resilient enough when it came to the air pollution, that my body just hadn't readjusted enough because of the air pollution. And I just sat there and my body was like, no, it's because I have lived in places where this air pollution doesn't exist, that I don't have to run around with a mask on my face all the time. And I revere my body enough to not put that pollution in my body and to stop it from going in. The practices of manufacturing and industry have led to mass extinction in the planet, and probably extinction for ourselves, hence Extinction Rebellion, hence the existential crisis that we're in. The planet's going to continue without us. It doesn't really care whether we're here or we're not. I mean, what good do we serve as we exist as a humanity right now? What good have we done for the planet as a whole? I want to live till the day where there is that tipping point that we've sort of moved over, so we are replenishing the earth. That's what I want to see. That's my vision.
But to that point, that it's also we are both having a very privileged response to this, because some people have no choice about the impact that climate change is having on them or pollution is having on them. And that was part of this whole experience, because during the lockdown I did a 10-week evening course at Goldsmiths. It was amazing, and I highly recommend it to anybody. I did a 10-week evening course on decolonizing anthropology, and it was fascinating. And at the end, each student had to do a presentation about the impact that this has had on us. And that's where this ecological triptych was really born, because I decided we had to look at indigenous peoples, and I decided to look at, and it's going to sound quite weird to some people, but I decided to look at Boko Haram. You know, because understanding what was happening in that place. So if you look at and Boko Haram means, I believe it means Western education is banned. And looking at how they went from one form of rebel to another form of quite violent rebel, and the links with that with climate change. So Lake Chad was home and land and workplace and everything to many, millions of people, and many different cultures and civilizations. And this is where many different cultures and tribes and indigenous peoples, and this is where they lived and they farmed, and all of their life was around that. But climate change has impacted that so much that they believe that in 20 years' time, Lake Chad may not exist. And so people had to migrate from around Lake Chad and then start to spread into different countries and different territories. And colonization as part of those lands, the historical colonization of those lands, meant that the governments and what have you was not supporting people in those areas in the way that you would believe that government and governing systems should. And so you saw the rise of these rebels initially providing alternative ways of support. And we may question whether that's right or wrong, but that's how a lot of these things happen. So then you start to think about what I started to think about, the concept of climate refugees, because us spending in the West is creating climate change. It's having a profound impact on climate change that is impacting these other places more than probably it's impacting us. And so when you have those climate refugees, that becomes the migrants and the immigrants that are trying to find a better life, to create a better life for themselves in Western societies, in different worlds. And so it felt really painful to recognize that there's a massive disconnect between all of this. And so that's what I'm looking at now.
It's as if the real privilege lasts or exists for me in the ability to displace that responsibility, in the ability to say that this is not my issue, this is yours, in the ability to say that, you know, I'm going to send my rubbish over to Thailand or to Sweden, where they, you know, use it as biomass, you know, fuel. But this idea of externalizing, and this comes back to, you know, the economics of yesteryear, which is all about externalizing responsibility as well. This is like external to the system. We don't have to kind of like consider this. And that's where, you know, yeah, here, like, you know, the privilege of being able to say this is not my issue, right? But you're creating it with no knowledge of the fact that you are. So there is this responsibility that you have, you know, that there's misinformation in your life where you think that there is nothing that you are to be responsible over.
Yeah, and part of that is also about the disconnect that many people have between us and the earth. There's that ego thing of, well, I can do what I want and send it elsewhere, and it's not really damaging me. You know, okay, summers in the UK have got hotter. You know, the weather changes, and people are going, well, this is great, but this is all a directly related to the way that we choose to spend money and the way that our ego gets in, the way that our ego, or we allow our ego sometimes to make decisions and make judgment calls about what we're going to do and what's right and wrong. And I'm not saying that I'm a saint either, because we all make choices. I am going through my own existential awakening. It's not a crisis, it's an awakening, and recognizing my own impact on all of this and being conscious about the decisions that I make in terms of how I spend money and where I spend money and all of these things, and not just about deciding to become vegan. That's one way, possibly, but even that could be quite a privileged response as well.
Harmful.
And so, yeah, and so I'm
nothing to say that you're not monocropping when you're vegan.
I mean, there's lots of ways to do it, and I'm not trying to tell anybody which way they need to do it. I'm just being very mindful and very conscious of the decisions that I make. And through the Buckminster Fuller Institute, they've given me the space to be able to explore this, and to talk and to think about how can I turn this into a piece of art. And that could be online, it could be offline, it could be world building, it could be an immersive. I don't know what it's going to be yet, but it's very much about looking at science and systems and the planet and thinking, how can I turn this realization that I'm having, these patterns that I'm seeing, into some art that will inspire and get people to think.
Coming back to the Boko Haram, one of the things that I learned about the Taliban and subsequent sort of mismanagement of Afghanistan and the, you know, the very strange but eventual lead up to, you know, access to fossil fuels, etc., through the war. There was something really fascinating that, you know, that came up when you were talking about the Boko Haram, and that is that when one is not seen and or heard, one will make a louder noise. And that noise gets louder, and one will want and desire to be seen. And they will do even more things. I remember this image of almost like this kind of like direct democracy. It was like the line of terrorism starts somewhere where one is not given the space and or the ability to express.
And let me just go on the record saying that the atrocities that are created by these organizations, and these organizations is terrible. And but I also still question, how did they start? How did they start? What
got them there?
Yeah, what got them there, and why continually going? And because everything's like Ouroboros, everything is connected. Absolutely everything is connected. And so I suppose what I do is I look, or I see, sometimes I don't even look, I just recognize the connection between these different worlds. And then, I've learned now that I have to mind map them. I just have to get them out, because I see them and I ask these questions and going, well, I've always been that child. Why? And I know that you're like that as well, because I know some of our conversations have been, yeah, but why? But why? Yeah, but I hear you, but why? And that's the point. And that's why our friendship is so great, because we have those conversations and we just end up in this, right, I'm going to go off and do some research and come back and go, I found out this. But that, and it's, did you know? But that is what drives me, what motivates me. That's what is now everything that I do. So the work prior to this, I suppose my career looked a little bit like it was chopping and changing, but I see that as my research and development phase. That I was exploring these different worlds to get a rudimentary understanding of some of them, to be able to then say, okay, so I mean, I'm not an expert on Freud, but when I saw the pattern, I mean, the ego, the superego, that makes sense. Whatever you may think of Freud, whatever you may think of that model, it does translate. And so that is what I'm doing. And I think that that's what you're doing, or trying to do, with Replenish Earth and with all of these conversations.
It is exactly that translation point. It's how does capitalism, psychology and the climate, what's the commonality there? Where does the differentiation lie? And I think where we start to activate these sort of centers, it's almost like we're moving away from linearity. We're moving away from this cause and effect in one little line, right? The ability to be able to map out the ecosystem, or map out the meta sort of like puzzle, put these pieces together, and then to sort of realign, it's like, I feel one of the things that, I feel we've been doing, and that kind of research and development phase has been a long time in my life as well, where it's like, okay, well, Tia, like, what are you doing? Are you this? Are you that? Are you? And it's like, you know what? Don't really bother. I don't really worry about giving myself a title, nor should you. But it's a case of like, it's a case of, bringing all of these pieces that we've gathered, and to be able to put the puzzle together the way that you want to, right? Like to have the opportunity to sort of play in the creation of the puzzle pieces in the way that you want to map it out together. And it doesn't matter. There is no right or wrong. It's whatever, the existential awareness is arising within you to sort of explore something, bring it back in, map it out, understand, okay, well, there's this really strange sort of like gap over here. I wonder what's going on there. And it kind of feels like this bit of a wormhole type thing. So you kind of like go in and off you go, and kind of like pop out the other end. And you're like, well, yeah, okay, cool. Well, do these sort of like connect? Like, is there a connection point between, that which exists in the psychology of humanity, that which exists in the external experiences that we have in cities and around the world? Like, of course, there are these, where the ego capitalizes the planet, is what I've, written.
Oh, I like that. I have to write that down. Where the ego capitalizes the planet.
Yeah, because that was it. It was like we're sort of like behind the scenes working on this death project, where death is about sort of the accumulation of assets, right? Like we see ourselves achieving well when we've accumulated stuff and we've got piles and piles of it. It's in our bank accounts, it's in our homes, like we've hoarded, it's in our lives and our minds. And so we accumulate all of these things, but what they represent is almost like this kind of, a dissatisfaction with the self. It's like we're not satisfied until we've actually accumulated and piled up all of this stuff. And then with the hope of like, write it in a will and hand it over to your children. And your children turn around and say, well, Mom, I don't really wear saris anymore.
There's a sense of security in that I find quite curious, that the sense for a lot of people, there is that sense of security in having stuff around them. I mean, I've just been seeing that, here in London, in the UK, London, people are starting to hoard toilet paper again because they think that we're about to go into another lockdown. I mean, people didn't need that much toilet paper in the first one. So, but there's this sense of, I've got it and I feel safe. And that it's like it's a security blanket that we need something to hold on to. And if it's big, then we feel better about it. If it's big and tangible and we can touch it, then it's okay, I feel good, I feel safe, I feel like I'm going to be okay. And I'm just curious about, where did that even come from?
I'm going to flip that, because a lot of the sort of economic branding that we've had up until like since post-war really has very much been, open this and, open this bottle to have happiness, open this and you will get this. It's like the externalization of security has allowed for us to externalize our security in things, which means that we need the thing, consumerism and addiction to it, in order for us to feel fulfilled, which is where the security sort of pops in. But the gap is, if that internal security were there, then one wouldn't require the representation of that security within an actual form. One would already have it within form. So there is a sort of insecurity-led capitalistic economizing, right? Like the economics of life at the moment has been branded around insecurity. And the more insecure we feel, the more we can be sold to, because if you weren't insecure, you wouldn't need it. So
that's the gap that I'm talking about in terms of our relationship with technology. That's what's in that gap, because we have this, well, I don't know what's here. I don't know how to feel into this. I don't know how to internalize and work out what it is that I need for myself, from myself, without externalizing that. And that's where the external worship of technologies and tools and that addictive behavior, that ritualistic behavior sometimes can come from. Because there is this internal gap of, well, do I need all this stuff? Do I need to have this dependency on the addiction to technology, to my mobile phone and swiping and all of these things to give me that, the addiction to likes on social media, to give me that rush to feel like I'm liked and people care about me and I'm connected, and that addiction. It's the same thing that I'm talking about with Cyborg Shamanism and with the Ecological Triptych. It's, what is that thing in the middle that we are running from or missing, or are giving ourselves plausible excuses for why we don't want to look into that and why we don't want to address that.
It's scary.
Some people call it
super scary to do that.
But we've all had to do that during this pandemic, during the lockdown. And I think that we all had to stop in that liminal present space and go, okay, I'm in this space now and I have to look at myself. And I think that that's why these kind of conversations now are bubbling to the surface, and there's more people deciding, I don't need all this crap around me. I'm going to give up. I know a couple of friends who have given up life in London and said, I'm going to travel and I'm going to explore until I decide or I work out what is right for me. But commuting every day on the Central Line is not it anymore.
Just doesn't cut it.
It
just doesn't cut it.
We want more. We want more.
Our mental health is more important. Everyone has mental health. It's how do you look after yours?
Well, yeah, recognizing the signs, and it's also why, and I'll say it here, it's also partly why. So it's just been announced that I am chair of Mental Health First Aid England, And I'm very proud to take that on. And it's a 3-year engagement. And I know it's no mean feat, but I am, I'm working with a great team and I'm working with experts who've done this. But looking at the impact that the pandemic has already had on people's mental health and well-being and will continue to have, I'm looking at, my remit is around looking at helping to address systemic inequalities around, the intersection of race and gender and ethnicity and age and these things. Where are these inequalities? Because we're all looking, every one of us is looking for some kind of sense of connection. We want that sense of connection. And what we've been doing is externalizing a lot of it. And because the stuff that we know that's been holding us in place has now fallen, a lot of us are lost. And we don't have necessarily the skills.
The security's not there.
Yeah. But also we have been in a society that has traditionally made it very difficult, almost impossible to be vulnerable and be in public, to share your feelings and, what have you. And so now people are overwhelmed by all of this emotion and not necessarily knowing where to get the support. And that's why I said yes to this chairship, because to be able to help people to recognize that in themselves or recognize that in others and support each other is another way of helping to move that dial forward, move all of us forward. So I'm really excited about that. But it all ties in with everything that we're doing. Our links to climate change, our links to capitalism and colonialism, all of these things are interconnected. And this is just my way of activism. Believing in something bigger than myself, being in service and having an idea of what good or great should look or feel like, and recognizing other people who are doing the same work or similar work to be able to come together. That's what activism is to me, and that's what I'm trying to do.
Firstly, a massive congratulations. I think the world is about to see the work, the puzzles, the hard times, the moments of almost like to go through the grief of having done so much work on this yourself, to then recognize where, the resurrection of that which is pure within you, to then be able to share that. Like, you yourself have been through an incredible journey. And in order for, others to have seen in you the ability to lead, in the work that you're doing, I think is
Oh, you've muted. You've muted. Yeah.
There we go. So yeah, I don't know how I did that. But it feels like an incredible honor for you and also for all of us, that you'll be centering and focusing and bringing in attention to such an important topic that has become even more important as we're now being mirrored with our own walls, right? Like, we are in this space, this kind of like next stage of like UK lockdown, I suppose, but it's where the internal work just got even more harder, basically.
Who's it? Oh, there's a great Instagram post by Elizabeth Gilbert, the author, and I know she's amazing, right? But she did this post that just really connected with me, where she said that we've all been doing, and many of us have been doing the work. We've been reading and going to, meditating and going to lectures and all of this stuff and talking and conversations, and we've been preparing. But what have we been preparing for? Now is what we've been preparing for. So we've done the work. Now is the time to turn that into the reality. And I really do believe that, I used to say joke about being an armchair activist and an armchair feminist, because I would sit at home and yell at the TV or yell at, the newspapers. But
I can imagine you doing that.
How dare you? I'm so angry. I'm going to write an angry letter.
Throwing a tomato at the TV screen.
I'm going to change my Facebook profile photo.
There's a banana.
Not bananas. There's too much
Okay,
around that.
potato.
But it was okay, at some point, if I really believe in this, then I need to get up and do something about it. I can see you still laughing. I know you muted yourself, but I can
I've got
still
this
see you
visual I can't get out of my head.
But at
Sorry.
some point, to Elizabeth Gilbert's point, at some point, we have to stop being in practice and just do. And now, this is what we've been preparing ourselves for, to be able to get ourselves through this time where we don't know what the future looks like. We never really did, but we convinced ourselves we knew what the future looked like. I mean, the idea of being a futurist, I say that I was given the title futurist. I don't say that I predict trends because I can't. But what I do is I take a humanity, planetary, anthropological, philosophical approach to looking at our relationship with technology and with how all of this stuff will impact us, our identities, our cultures, our economics, the impact we have in the world, our ecosystems. That's my approach to futurism. It's storytelling and connecting the dots and systems thinking. It's all of these things, but it's never static. It's never static. And so we're in this space where we have to keep trying to move forward.
And I'm just going to show a comment by John Collins.
There's Collins.
Dear human you, John, hi. As people, we are verbs, not nouns. We need to start behaving as doers. And, coming back to, thanks, John, yes. Coming back to sort of like this now, we're launching now partners, kind of like the expression of B Corps and the work that we're doing kind of like globally. Replenish Earth is one of the partners, and now is all about like, we have been in prep all this time. Now is the time to stop throwing tomatoes at the TV screen and let go of the sort of umbilical cord of society, let go of the umbilical cord of of need, and determine and turn that into something that Guy Philip Goldstein in one of our earlier lives mentioned. The minimum viable shock is go out there, learn what it's like to be in that space. Like, now that you've been through this research and development phase, you're like, I've been through this myself. I want to share my notes with you. Now, who's at the table so we can actually discuss next steps? So that's where there is a beautiful opportunity to sort of sprout the seeds. Like, we've got these seeds now. We've worked so hard at like getting these seeds, and now we get to plant them somewhere. Where are you going to? Where are you going to plant?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so just to John's point, John Collins' point, I completely agree that we're verbs, and I'm just going to. There's a Buckminster Fuller quote that I came across the other day that I think this is it. This is it. This describes me. It is, I live on Earth at present, and I don't know what I am. I know that I am not a category. I am not a thing, a noun. I seem to be a verb, an evolutionary process, an integral function of the universe. And when I read that, I went, yep, that's me. That's me. That is what I am. It's that we are all verbs. I think, who was the other one that said it? Oh, God, I've forgotten his name now. It's gone. But the fact that we are doers, we should be doers. We should be, wow, I say should. That I'm choosing to be a doer, to act, and to take, to stand up and actually take all the years of practice and experience and meditation and learning and conversations and turn
Breath
it into
work, shaking,
and exactly.
all of it.
But the beauty is not knowing what that looks like, and not being so fixed on, I want it to be this, it has to look like this. It's the beauty is in that journey, in that exploration, in coming together with other people who have different ideas. And you don't have to, and can I also say that there's also beauty and power and wisdom and knowledge in having in conversing with people that you don't agree with. because otherwise we just end up in an echo chamber, recreating
But
the
knowing
same.
how to have that conversation,
Yeah,
right? Instead of throwing tomatoes at the TV screen, it's like, wait, we need to have this chat. We need to actually have this conversation in a way that is not, depletive, so that we can
yeah,
do a yes and. It's like, yes, I see. Yes and means yes, I see
yeah,
beauty in, even if it's
yeah.
that little bit. I see beauty in what you're
Yeah.
saying. I see a
Well,
truth, even if it's really small, but I'm finding that truth. I'm finding that beauty in it.
yeah, definitely. It's the ripples. I spoke at a graduation event online during the lockdown, and the theme was ripples. And so ripples across the earth, and it was a, what was it called? I think it was a innovation management program at Central St Martin's, and their theme, the graduation theme, was ripples. And I spoke about the fact that what I do is I look for those small ripples. Sometimes, first of all, I recognize that every action and inaction creates a ripple, and being very conscious of that. Me deciding that I'm not going to do something will create another ripple. But what I do is I look for those really small ones, the ones that sometimes people will ignore or bypass and say, oh, that's not valuable. It's that putting your ear to the ground and listening and going, okay, there's something, I'm not quite sure what that is, but there's something there and I'm going to follow that. And that may help me work out where I need to be in that particular moment. Because again, it's all to do with timing as well. We turn up in these places and we engineer serendipity, and we end up having these conversations and meeting people that, we've already been connected. So I'm looking at the chat and I can see Pierre Escobar, and he said, oh, we know, you and I know each other. I'm like, oh, such a small world, such a small world. But by the choices that we
Shout
make,
out to Pierre.
yeah, by the choices that we make, we end up in these kind of conversations and these spaces where we have probably crossed paths so many times and crossed ideas, and now we're in a space where we are pollinators. You mentioned earlier the caterpillar and the butterfly, and one of the, I've forgotten his name and it's terrible, but one of the last week's session was by a creative guy called David, and he spoke about the fact that the purpose of a caterpillar is not to become a butterfly, is to become a pollinator. It goes into the cocoon and it then turns into the butterfly. But it's not just the idea that it's going to look beautiful. Its purpose is to become a pollinator. And I went, oh, yes, that's it. That is it. That, we go into these cocoons, we must metamorphize, and we come out the other side, and we're not just there to look good. We actually have a purpose. We have a purpose, and it's recognizing that all that pain and suffering and that, turning into mulch or whatever is part of the process in helping us to get to that point of going, okay, now that I've come out, what is it I'm going to do? And, why? And who else? Where are the other butterflies? Where are my kin? Let's have a butterfly rave.
The butterfly rave that takes me to like location, and then you can spread your wings and fly, like spread them, nothing to clip them.
Yeah, in that short space of time that we're there, we are here in this physical body. Why not get out there and start pollinating, cross-fertilizing, and creating the things that we want?
I can't say anymore.
I
can't say anymore. I can't. I know that it's going to be another hour.
I know. I saw the time. I'm going to stop.
There's no need to stop. But one of the I suppose the core message that we're sharing is, where do you want to pollinate? Like, how are you going to take everything that you've learned so far, and what are you going to be pollinating? Like, this is to the audience. Like, where are you using this, this cocoon, this chrysalis, to recognize where you want to become, the verb of you, right? The ability to shift your own, the ego's evolution in this almost chaotic, smoke-filled territory, right? In being able to sort of internalize this journey and recognize what the next steps are for you. What do you think, Adah?
So I have, in the process, so let's step back a bit. With all of these patterns, I recognize what I also saw and have created is a framework that connects the dots between all those different worlds that I was talking about earlier. And what I'm in the process of doing is launching the ISM consultancy, because ISM, looking at all the different ISMs and the framework that I've got, actually takes you through all of that. So the framework is 5 phases. The first is leave. How do we leave behind the old isms, the old ideas, belief systems, rather than trying to redefine the problem? We know there's a problem. The fact that we're here having a conversation, we know there's a problem. Put that to the side and work out, number one, how do we leave those old structures behind and come up with new value systems? The second one is breathe. How do we recognize and take the tension out of those systems so that we can then start to breathe and we can create a new hypotheses for change? The third one is grow. What are the technologies, tools, data, insights, wisdom, indigenous wisdom, traditional ecological knowledge, natural systems? Where is all the knowledge and wisdom that we need to be able to try and make this hypothesis true? The fourth is flow. And with flow, I always ask the question, what kind of ancestor do you want to be? What more is possible? So taking all of this, it's that, okay, this is now a systemic change that we're making. And the fifth one is ground. How do we ground this down into some reality? How do we ground this down? How do we create a movement? How do we create kinship and citizenship of all of that? And so what I'm doing is using the framework to create the ISM consultancy so that we can tackle different isms. The first one we're looking at is racial justice, but through the Buckminster Fuller program, I'm also looking at the artistic immersive experience version of this. So if anybody wants to find out more, they can look at, go to ism.earth and follow me on social media. I've got an amazing co-founder, Marcus Anderson. We're building our team. We are in talks in some discussions to start building this out. And anybody who's interested, please get in touch. That's how I'm doing it.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Adah, more information on the screen. Please get in contact with Adah. I think this is going to be such an exciting next couple of years, Adah. I cannot wait to join this journey with you.
You're already there, darling. We've known each other for years, but it feels like finally our worlds are starting to overlap more and more, and I can see that. And so it's a real pleasure to have been able to be a witness to your journey and now recognize that our paths and our journeys and our purposes are overlapping. So watch out, world, is all I can say. More of Adah and Tia together.
On that note, thank you all very, very much. Don't forget to subscribe to YouTube, Replenish Earth, and follow Adah. This is it. This is that moment. Pollinate. Go ahead. Yeah. Do it. Big love to you all. Ciao.
Ciao. Bye.